think that's a massive one,
Yeah.
because people don't know they don't know the numbers.
Holiday hunger, we really want to end that, because we get that the free school meals in school, but what do the kids do when they're not in school?
Everyone just needs to come together and they need to find the best way to make change.
During the holidays, children who are on free school meals don't get those meals, and for some of those children, many of them, that's the only hot meal they get during the day.
If you don't eat well, something could happen, but I think eating healthy and keeping it balanced is the good way to live and right.
The footballer Marcus Rashford has forced the government into another U-turn over the provision of free meals to disadvantaged children during school holidays.
1 million people have signed Marcus Rashford's petition to end child food poverty in this country. 1 million people within a week. Fantastic. And I hope that now the government will see that it's absolutely essential to do what is right.
Thank you so much for 1 million. Yes, let's go!
We're actually getting the message across, so thank you so much.
We did it! Woo!
It's so nice to see how many people all across the UK care so much about what we're doing and what we're fighting for.
It just shows how much people care about this and how much people are suffering as well.
It's Father Face 2021, who are we?
Hearing from everyone this weekend, it's made me understand that we need a food revolution.
It's just been great to learn about loads of different issues that I didn't even think were that important.
I just want to say how inspiring this weekend has been for me.
This weekend has honestly really inspired me to go out and make some change.
Totally move away and have some food and lower the salt and the sugar.
There are recommendations here on the disgrace that is food inequality, the disgrace that is children going to bed hungry, the disgrace that is a government that seems not to understand the depths of inequality.
You don't ban things, but you educate people and you try to nudge them in the right direction.
Compared to that burger. I can't afford to think, to feel, to be this way. I can't afford to have the food on your plate. Woo!
I'm just really grateful to be able to come here and have this opportunity. I never would have been able to go to a festival like this otherwise. I've only recently got involved with the Right to Food and the Food Foundation, so I can't wait now to see what we're going to do in the future and see what we can achieve. And I can't wait to go back to my region and start tackling the massive food poverty and lots of other issues around vulnerability that we have there. So yeah.
If we all campaign together, we can make a huge difference, not only in the UK, but then throughout the entire world as well, because we do really need to change the food system. It's been amazing, really inspiring just listening to everyone and meeting everyone from all across the UK.
You should always reach for the stars. I believe you should actually reach for the planets that we don't know exist yet, because if you reach for something that you don't know actually where you're going yet, you will get somewhere.
Young people are really leading the movement on climate change. They're leading the conversation and they're making their voices heard. This is where the real conversations happen, outside, not inside.
Our national leaders really need to get a grip of the situation that we're in and know that we need transformational change, because as people, as planners are saying, there is no plan B.
we're here at COP4 to talk about, again, you know, how does food link in with the climate crisis and what we can do as ordinary citizens and as, you know, young people who are passionate to do something about it.
I grew up in poverty. I experienced pretty poor standard of living, but also the kind of idea of just trying to survive every day without food was hard. I like my grub, so to speak. I like my food, but when it's not there, it impacted me. It impacted me negatively. I benefited from, at the time, free school meals, but I was that insecure. I had so much food insecurity that I knew I had to do something about it.
We're young food activists. We've been to the government, we've been to 10 Downing Street, we've worked with the government. We want the government to put food on the agenda.
I think marches like the one we had yesterday, the massive youth strike with, you know, thousands and thousands of people. I think it is really important, and I think making our voices unavoidable at an event like this is really important, and just reminding our leaders that we're watching them.
Do you think we need to have like an ideology shift, and how do we get that?
It shouldn't be down to us to be seen as consumers driving the market. It should be down to us as citizens to make this a more political issue.
Do you think business and the system can ever prioritise environment over profit?
Of course it can, and there are many businesses that do, particularly if you think in the food area.
I can only go back to my own experiences and what I would have been doing if I didn't have things there like youth centres and stuff where me and my friends could go and play in a safe environment. And obviously when you go there, they're having, you know, meals, they've got hot meals there prepared for them.
We're talking about how the food system connected environmental justice and climate justice, so it's a really big deal. So what do you think has brought this shift about?
I think the reason that it has begun to shift the other way is simply that the problems have got so big that they can't be ignored.
I think that we could eventually get to the point where, you know, everybody in primary school in England and across the UK will have free school meals.
Yes, I think it should be primary and secondary school. And if you look at the culture of a school where everyone eats together and they eat good food, it is just completely different from a school where that doesn't happen.
I think that it depends on the area that you live in. If you live in an area that has like a high prevalence of food inequality, you don't really think about like the food system and like how it affects like your daily life or how it affects other different things. But if you can access food really easily, like local food that is healthy, then you won't need to think about it as much.
Politicians, they should go and look for themselves, have a look online, see what people are actually campaigning about, see what people mean, go have a look in schools, see who's not eating, see how many people are actually having free school meals each day and how many people are just above the line to get them.
To my young people, I would definitely say don't shy away from stepping into activism, because it doesn't take a lot. It might take a post on social media, it might take a quick video or a quick letter to get MPs, and in that all you need to detail is the issue that's concerning you, a possible solution, and maybe a few signatures to show that you've got a crowd following you and how that supports you needing change. And I think if you're if you're a young person and you're seeing this and you're kind of laying back on it, expecting the world to change, it's too much of a privilege to do that. We need change, so you've got to step up and do it.
Great. Hopefully that gave you a bit of a flavour of the journey which Yumna and Ryan have been going on. But so, Ryan, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You featured in the film here, but there's a lot more to say, isn't there?
It is. So it's a real pleasure to be here. As you can tell, I've got a really strong Glaswegian accent, and tell me off at some other point that you couldn't understand a word that I say. But as you can tell, this journey has been going on for a long time. I entered the care of the state, effectively known as a looked after child, almost since the day I was born. And I always knew that something wasn't quite right about that. I always thought that I needed to try and change how I was, looked after, the people around me, why things were going wrong. And since 2011, May 2011, I've lived in a positive foster placement, and it's completely changed my life. I've had the right to food, upheld and respected by my foster parents. But for too many people, that's not the reality, and we need to really change it. I'm 20 years old. I've been an activist since 2014, so when I was, let me do maths, 12, and that's really scary that at the age of 12, that you need to be an activist for the right to food. In 2022 in Britain. Just think about that. I'm a law student. I study law. I want to rip the law up and start again if I could. There's so many fundamental difficulties about how we can even draft the basic human right into legislation and say to the state that the right to food isn't being upheld. COVID has taught us, a lot of the issues, exacerbated a lot of them, actually, if I'm honest. That is wrong with food policy in this country. Video, 14, 15 minutes long, people like Yumna and I, who really need to, represent and stand up for the voices of other fellow, children and young people across Britain, for a right to food, enshrined in law. It is already by the Human Rights Act. We've got a government that wants to scrap that. My plea to you all is really listen to the voices of children and young people. The government really needs to listen to the voices of children and young people. Currently, it's not happening as often as it should. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm just going to add about my own experience. So I'm Yumna. I'm 17. I'm from Birmingham, which has one of the highest, food poverty rates in the whole of the UK. Pre-COVID, more than 1 in 3 young people suffered from food poverty, and so pandemic has been going on for 2 years. Obviously, that number has obviously increased. There's been an over-reliance on food banks. Food banks are supposed to be a short-term solution to many families and many households, but now it's become families are relying on food banks to feed their kids who really shouldn't be going hungry. I live in a food desert, which Deb was explaining in the video, which is an area that has oversaturated with junk food, oversaturated with fast food, and there isn't many options for young people to have spaces where they are comfortable to eat, to eat healthy food and to access local grown food. So I come from that background, and I see a lot of people in my community where there are, in my school, there is, I think it's over 60% of young people are relying on free school meals, and as part of our campaign of children's right to food, and we are trying to expand that and try and get more young people who are disadvantaged, and try and get them to access free school meals as well, because currently right now the gap is really small. The eligibility criteria is not open to all young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, and I know Scotland and Wales have got young people get fed in schools, no need to pay, but in England that you haven't got that. If you're not, you know, eligible for free school meals, you don't have the right to a hot meal every single day in school, which is devastating because young people can't concentrate in schools if they haven't got, you know, the meals. You can't function without food. Food is the fundamental basis that, you know, it's everyone has the right to access healthy food, and it's the one thing that binds human beings together everywhere in the world, is that if you don't have food, and if you don't belong somewhere, which is a really big thing when you're talking about young people, because if young people don't have a safe space to vocalize their concerns, like, you know, the Food Foundation has given me and Ryan a platform to amplify our concerns, and not just amplify our concerns and our issues surrounding food system transformation, but actually giving us an opportunity to create innovative solutions, to campaign, to lobby the government, to lobby our local authority. For me, for example, I work with, you know, Birmingham Local Authority, and I try and get more young people to be part of forums or opportunities for them to vocalize their concerns in terms of, you know, public health, you know, listening to our lived experiences, and not just listening to our lived experiences and saying, let's just invite a bunch of young people because it would look good, or, you know, we need them, you know, for pictures and so on. Because I've had people come and they're like, yeah, well, we'll just get you as the representative for young people. I don't want to gatekeep. I want to get more young people to be involved. I want, you know, all young people's voices to be heard. I can't represent all young people in a way. You know, that young people are so diverse, they come from such different backgrounds, and so if we aren't listening to a wider group of young people, how do we expect our policies and our practices to actually, you know, be implemented and to, you know, to serve for the betterment of society? So that's the background that I come from in food, and I just think that the children's right to food has so many different, you know, parts to it, and some of the most successful parts of our campaigning has been with the Healthy Start. So these are vouchers that are given to pregnant women to support, you know, in, you know, raising up a child. And so we've raised that up to £4.25, the vouchers, so that they can buy nutritional food, so that they can buy, you know, powder milk for their babies, stuff like that. And we've expanded that Healthy Start scheme. There's also been so many different things surrounding trying to reduce stigma around free school meals. You know, young people who live in lower income backgrounds, because you often get people who will say, well, yeah, children do deserve, you know, everyone deserves the right to food, but are you reinforcing the stereotype that lower income children have the right to, lower income children deserve, you know, lower quality food? And that's something that's not often talked about, is what is the quality of food that young people have? We have a lack of youth centres, austerity. There's so many things that have happened that mean that young people don't have access to healthy, you know, healthy food, safe spaces to vocalize their concerns. I think that is a massive, massive issue in terms of, you know, making sure that young people have agency. And you've seen in the video that we're given opportunities to have that agency, to speak our truth, to be who we are, and vocalize our lived experiences on food system, and trying to basically target key stakeholders within our food system to talk about the range of issues that are in our food system, not just the lack of healthy food, but also the lack of clean water. And you would think that in Britain, right, the 6th richest economy in the world, that young people don't have access to these basic things like Brian was talking about. It's human rights. It's supposed to be it's enshrined in the law. So that's the background that I come from. Yeah.
Thanks, Yumna. So this here is the charter. So Yumna touched on this a little bit in some of the asks that the young people have pulled together. We call it the Children's Right to Food Charter. Ryan, do you want to say a little bit about the charter and what we've done around that?
Yeah, so the charter came around from the Future Food Inquiry, the Children's Future Food Inquiry, and that ultimately was, you know, an inquiry that took place across the whole of Britain, and there was key, you know, recommendations made from it. Some of them you can see up there, but I hope you can see for the small print. But one of them that sticks out for me, and from experience and how well Scotland does or can do it in such areas, is a food commission. to constantly, and I mean constantly, in a proper sense, is to monitor how the quality of our food in Britain is in our schools and youth centres, etc. It's about that idea that the government can constantly be held accountable for the decisions, all the decisions that they're not making, and where the public funds are going. To challenge the government, you know, to make recommendations to them that they have to implement, and it should be statutory, it should be in law that a food commission is there. It leads nicely on a topic later on that we'll speak about, a good food nation, a good food bill. What does that mean? What should it mean? Who should it benefit? Again, everybody. That work was extensive, the Future Food Inquiry. It needs to be acted upon. You want to say anything?
Yeah, one of the ones that sticks out to me is probably the stigma that I touched on before. It's trying to eliminate the stigma surrounding young people who don't have access to healthy food, and actually just giving them the space and the agency to vocalise their concerns and actually lobby government and lobby policymakers to drive food policy high up on the agenda. And now obviously, because of the pandemic and because of the campaigning that a lot of organisations have done, like the Food Foundation, like Young People Speaking Out, that's when it's got the government's attention. So we need to just do more of that and sustain that, and make sure that we continue driving up food on the policy agenda, and try and actually execute a long-term food system strategy. And I was talking about the National Food Strategy, and I sort of, you know, spoke on, you know, the youth perspective on the National Food Strategy, and wrote a section where I thought, you know, about, for me personally, what I see in my community in Birmingham, with, you know, more than 1.3 million kids across the whole of the UK not having access to food, and who are, you know, eligible for free school meals. And sometimes you will get young people who don't take up free school meals in school, even if they are eligible, because of this stigma, because of, you know, this shame that is attached to it. And it's not a young person's fault, and that's one thing we should understand, is that it's never an individual's fault. It's like what you were talking about before, it's the system, it's a system that has already been built, and it's not designed to protect or to serve young people. So that's just what I wanted to add.
Michael, do you want to ask?
I just want to sit and listen. No, well, first, thank you, Yumna and Ryan. It's incredibly difficult to take one's personal experience and transform that energy into political power. Not just talk, but you've turned it into real power. And I commend you. Most people, adults or young people, aren't able to do that. And that takes a lot of energy. And as you've experienced, it demands more of you, unfortunately, right? Because it can turn into anger, it can turn into depression, and it often does as well. We have our good days and our bad days. So I just want to thank you today for being here. I'm just going to reflect and echo what you've said, and then ask you a few questions. And you know, when I hear you talking, well, first I just want to say, I've encountered you and your colleagues in my first report. When the pandemic started, I had to write my first report as Special Rapporteur. The pandemic was in March. My report was due in June. No one knew what was going on. And I couldn't travel. We're all in our house. All I had was it was 3 at the time, a 3-year-old child, a very old dog, and my laptop. And I had to be the UN Special Rapporteur, and I didn't know what the job meant. People kept just emailing me. That's all I knew. That's all, you know, I did what everyone does. Google, you know, school closure. And the videos of you all, Dev, I remember him specifically because he was pleading with politicians very specifically, and I had read the charter. And when I wrote in my report about school closures, you all taught me that. Specifically you all. That's what gave me the framework I needed to understand what the hell's going on in a very short amount of time. And it's not what's going on, but what needs to be done. Those are two very hard questions. And sometimes it's you have the people that are understanding what's going on and then what is to be done, and you were doing both because it was coming from your own truth and your own community. So, you know, often historically youth bring radical ideas because, you know, people say, they have nothing to lose and everything to gain, right? But I think with climate change, with COVID, the youth have everything to lose. They have everything to lose. And to, what Yumna's saying, it's not you invite them and we listen and we take the photo and well done and they participated. They have the answers. They're leading us. They know exactly what's what. They're wiser beyond their years. This is the situation. And the youth is not a homogenic block. It's farmers, they're workers, they're students, they're migrants, whatever, people with disabilities. They are everything. And because they have the most at stake right now, that first line, the future is now, basically, that's what I'm saying, exactly right. So to think through with you, this is such a pleasure that I get to ask you questions. So it's so clear that you've raised awareness. And then COVID raised awareness also. And then Marcus Rashford raised awareness. And that's hard work. That often takes years and everything got accelerated. And to your point, Brian, and it exacerbated existing problems. What do you think we should be doing next? What have you learned from COVID? What have your impressions? And where would you want to advance? And I'll just add a sort of another layer. It was actually your remarks, Yumna. The way I've experienced activism is the climate change activists seem to be a different group. And at COP, it was hard to get food on the agenda, generally speaking. And out of the official documents at the end, it's sort of buried in this committee that's in the back, in the basement, and that sort of thing. And then the food activists, I'll put myself in that group. We're a different group, but we all are asking similar questions. Are you experiencing that as well? Is there a way of bringing those groups together? So that's a bunch of questions. Say whatever you want. I just threw out 500 questions to give you the freedom to do whatever you need to do.
Yeah, I think I should go. You mentioned a really good point. I always speak to people who are more climate activists. I also campaign on climate justice issues and raising awareness about climate change. But I also understand the relevance of food in the conversation. I think that the reason why I don't think you see a lot of food activists, or it hasn't been as prominent as climate justice activists, especially within I would say the revolution in young people actually becoming food activists has been just for the past few years. The climate justice conversation has gone on for so much longer than that. That's the first point. And second of all, you just don't hear young people speaking about food because of the stigma attached to it. That's another point that you just don't see a lot of young people talking about because of the stigma attached to it. And third of all, it's not an exciting. I feel like with climate change, you get a lot of young people speaking about it. It's a very sort of, it's a very attractive sort of issue to speak about as a young person. If you speak to a young person who is a so-called activist or advocate, you most likely assume that they're campaigning for climate change. So I think our right to health has been robbed of us at a very young age. It's gradual. The effects are very gradual. It's you don't realize it, and I think I said it in the video, but it's like if a child doesn't have food, yes, they understand that they're hungry, but two, they have to rely on the system around them. They can't do individual actions to change that, to change their current situation. They have to rely on parents. They have to rely on the system around them, and that's one thing that's the disconnect, is how can we get that systemic change, but also get people to recognize their own agency and their own power as ordinary citizens, to contribute to the discussion and lobby government and do as much as they can personally and collectively to lobby change. And I've forgotten the other question.
I suppose I would add, I'll take your second question first, because I've got a really nice line to say about COP26. And that line is that people made Glasgow, and it was the best city to have COP at. I'm not just saying that because I'm Glaswegian. Well, I might get away with it. But there was a real divide when COP came to Glasgow, and it wasn't the people, it was what was said and where the people were at. The zonal idea, a blue zone, so that NGOs and political leaders and the biggest activism, or the biggest activist going, and it's not Greta, but it was David Attenborough. He turned up. took the world by shock and told the world that we're losing a losing battle. COP26 made me really frustrated. As a citizen of Glasgow, knowing that people from all across the world were coming to my city, and there was people who, even being in Glasgow at COP26, being part of it, some of them in the blue zone making the decisions and helping to make the pact, as they want to call it, still coming out and saying that they didn't feel that they were listened to, and that the action wasn't there. The rhetoric was, as you'd expect, but the actions weren't. That's why it took an extra day. It ended up being 13 days, unlucky for some, not the 12. You know, the green zone was actually where the activism was. That's where we were. You know, that's where the clips were from COP up there, was us. The green zone and some of the fringe events was COP26. Not the blue zone, not what came out of it, sadly, was us. To go on your first question, what needs to happen next? First of all, potentially, I hope, I'm going to turn on the telly a week to tonight even, maybe even 2 hours from now in a week's time, and see that a government minister in the UK government, in the House of Commons, actually makes a ministerial statement on the white paper coming out of the National Food Strategy. It's been too long. Far, far too long. Initially it was supposed to be January that the government would set out a response, and it's the 7th of March. I know governments are known for, or some are known for taking their time, but that is taking a biscuit. That's not taking their time. Pardon the pun. But that's the point. This is where we're at. I think more about the UK government. I'm on it about the Scottish government, don't get me wrong, but that's for a different day. And take the Good Food Nation bill on that point from Scotland. There's not a commitment properly from ministers in Scotland, even under the most, and let me put it straight, the most amount of scrutiny I've seen for potentially a long time on a hugely important human rights issue. Not a promise even, or a commitment to the right to food, and a Good Food Nation bill. Who's writing the policy? Who's writing the law to say, from a government point of view, that it doesn't need to be enshrined in Scots law? And we're supposed to be leading the way, and that's where we're at. It feels like it should be us writing that policy and writing that piece of legislation. Well, that's for a separate day again. But some of you here are law students. You know how bad some law can be. Bad law, we all hate it, bad law. But look at how quickly we had emergency COVID pills put in place. It was like that overnight. Now, you and I both know that political will doesn't, and changes don't happen overnight. Would I be doing this a decade nearly? Activism. I know things don't happen overnight, but COVID powers did, and that was a public health crisis. Food poverty and poverty generally is a public health crisis. The nod around the room. I only need to look at you guys, the audience, and the panel here. But you go to any public forum and you say that human rights breaches are happening daily, whether it's COVID, Brexit, poverty. We're clearly not doing something right somewhere. So, one, I need that ministerial statement a week today. I need it plastered all over the news for a week after that. And then I need a ministerial resignation of some sort. Because something's not happening. Or, a way of, remedying that is a set government minister, even a Secretary of State for food system.
Yeah.
That's blue sky thinking, I know I'm known for it, but there's one, couple of words, recommendation straight to the government after watching. Hope you are. Blue sky think. Change it overnight. Make the ministerial statement Monday. I'll be waiting. That's what we need to do next.
Yeah, and just to add to that, regular consultations with young people and having dedicated young people that you go and speak to all the time about food and reaching out to a wider group of young people. And to answer your first question, because thanks to Ryan I remembered, to build back after this pandemic, we need a healthier generation of young people, and we're not going to get this unless we actually have proper implementation of recommendations that were in the National Food Strategy. and executed on executed on all different levels, local government, forums, throughout all these different layers of government. We need to actually implement good food policy that is putting people before profit, and that is actually helping heal our planet, and helping young people's health and people's health in general, and also addressing some of the newer issues that have come up in food system transformation, and some of that is like junk food advertising. So if you compare the extortionate, the massive amounts of money that is poured into junk food advertising with the little that is poured into public health professionals to support people's health in this country, that is the difference in that is so stark. And that companies do pour those billions of pounds into junk food advertising because they understand the power of the mind. They understand how to get into consumers' minds. They understand that that junk food advertising that they're plastering up everywhere has an impact into how a consumer behaves when they go, or how a citizen behaves when they go into a supermarket and they're making their choices when they're buying food. So that's another thing. And also over-reliance on food banks, and also food delivery apps. That's been a thing now, where you've got an increase in Deliveroo, Uber Eats, Just Eat, all of these food delivery apps, because people want convenience, and that's where you get these those packaged meals and those ready meals, and so addressing that as well, and making sure that people understand why food policy is so important, and the connection that it has to environmental justice, and racial justice and social justice as well as a whole.
One brief point.
Yeah.
The climate justice idea is about the planet. That's why it's easier for people to speak about. The food stigma is personal. It's harder to speak about. Yeah. And that is plain fact. You can a personal experience, through climate science is, key, yes. But it's easier to join a rally like COP did, brought people together from all over. It's harder to sit down and write a policy about your own lived experience of food poverty if there's such a high stigma around it. That's the difference, And then you even marry that up together at the global gathering of COP26 of leaders across the world, and food was barely mentioned. What are we doing? It's crazy. I don't get it. I really don't.
So Michael, to Ryan's challenge really, which countries do you think we can learn from? Which countries are doing? Obviously.
The heavy size. And I'm not being flippant. No one's figured it out. So what I'm doing on the international level is trying to rally governments, because every country's in a food crisis. Every country has an increased rate of hunger and malnutrition. And the rate of famine is increasing globally. It was bad before the pandemic, right? As Ryan noted, and it's worse now. No one's got it right. Combined with governments can't even work together. My son's 6 years old. He knows how to play well with others. Yeah? These ministers and politicians and leaders, they can't play well together. So what I'm doing on the international level is so my next report is about COVID, is trying to rally governments, civil society, social movements, on what does it mean to respond multilaterally, globally, internationally. So, again, I'm not being flippant. The answers are here. The answers are, you're in Birmingham, you look to Glasgow. You're in Glasgow, you look at Carmarthen. You're in Carmarthen, you look at, where are we? Canterbury. I think in really specific terms in that regard, right? And then if you need to go regionally, then you look across wherever, right? So your sense of geography and community, really in that regard. Where are you importing food? Where are you exporting food? Who do you already have those relationships with? So you would start with your relationships that you have regionally, locally, and all of that. I lost my train of thought.
Right, maybe we could pick up on, Ryan talked a bit about the commission idea, which is obviously very live at the moment in Scotland. There's a conversation around the Good Food Nation bill. Why does getting these structures right matter so much? Like, does that unlock more than it might appear to on paper?
Yeah.
You know, a commission, it sounds a bit dry, you know, but why is it such an important part of this right to food sort of progression?
Yeah. So I'll just take a step back. So I have been following the Good Food Bill in Scotland, starting with the previous government, and tracking it. And recently I presented evidence to the current government, and I had to phrase it, you're doing a good job, but... So there's a time to be a diplomat, right? I had to bite my tongue. No, but there is an opportunity there. So I have been following Scotland, but the fact that, Ryan, you pointed to the institutional structures matter almost more than whatever the words on paper are. Because that's the action. What turns word into action? Our commissions, our institutions, are a youth council, are these ideas. Because what you're doing is you are deciding to how are we going to continue to give meaning to the right to food in a dynamic way, and in a way that has accountability. So yes, words matter, yes, the words on paper matter, but those questions of institutional structures matter, I would almost say, even more, right? I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and so, Ryan, are you hopeful that the Commission, well, you've got a new role in Scotland now, remind me the title of it.
Good Food Nation Ambassador with the Scottish Food Coalition.
A Good Food Nation
Ambassador.
The ambassador, that's right. Sorry. So you're following very closely whether or not a commission is going to appear in the bill. It wasn't in the first draft of the bill, was it?
It wasn't. Pretty disappointing. It wasn't. I fully expected it to be there, purely on the basis that one commission that has been really effective has been the Poverty and Inequality Commission in Scotland, and that was statutory. That was from the Child Poverty Act in 2017.
Yeah.
And again, I fully expect the next couple of big reports from that commission to be really, really powerful, because it will, like your work that's coming up, a report on COVID, it's going to state what we need to do, and if it is direct cash to folk, that will need to be it. But it also needs to be around that idea of common principles from a commission, is to ultimately make recommendations to the government, make sure that the government then delivers them. But also a statutory that actually you can't get rid of, because by law it's there, fund it right, yes, but make those recommendations. The other point I would make on that is that usually commissions in their work, almost like what you were saying there, it's about localism. And it's about actually sometimes the answers aren't from other countries, it's from localised good bits of practice. And I think the more local food we get, the better. And sometimes these commissions, their work's incredible, because that's the kind of research we do. They'll find out local good practice, and they'll say, try and replicate this across the country. Now it's hard, obviously, if one local authority or one area is funded separately depending on population, etc. But if there's good practice out there, we need to really shout about it and get the megaphones out and shout about it, and then deliver it across, I say Scotland, but across, England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and hopefully the rest of the world. So I have high hopes for it, because I know that through different, policy ideas in Scotland, how, far ahead we are, but I get a sense that actually the institutional bureaucracy might seep through. It might be them saying in Scotland, yes, we're going to legislate for a Good Food Nation bill, and then through kind of ditch that, because it's easy to say, we'll put that in another piece of legislation and we'll wait until we consult again and again and maybe again. And I get a sense that's maybe what's happening here in England. So I do have high hopes, but me being an activist, like you were saying there, I bite my tongue, because I feel like actually we might end up going backwards rather than forwards, which is really, really, really saddens me to see.
I know you both have prepared some questions for Michael. Have you got anything burning that you'd like to raise?
Oh
dear. A general question, what are you going to do next, apart from write your report? Maybe planning coming back.
Yeah, that's a good one.
From Scotland again.
Yeah, Scotland is near and dear to me in the sense that right before the pandemic started, it was comrades at Glasgow Law School that had invited me and I was going to come. They connected me to Nurse Scotland. And it ended up all being online. So Glasgow is the top of my list. Other places, I met a city councillor from Birmingham through the Food Foundation. And they're working on the international level as well.
She's become an MP now.
Yeah, okay.
Oh,
wow.
Been
Congrats.
elected as first black MP for Birmingham, which is a big thing because Birmingham, I think it's like 48% from ethnic minority communities, yet we haven't had a black MP yet. So.
Congrats, that's a political victory, I think, for the community, for sure. And so, for me, this trip, to be honest, the idea of flying, it took my in-laws, my cousins, it took a lot of people to cover for me to come here. I'm not, there's a phrase in Arabic when you're like, you do something and you make a big deal, like, oh, it was so difficult. But it's just traveling. Traveling is hard. And what I haven't been able to do is official country visits, right? I haven't been able to meet people face to face, and that matters. It's all been through Zoom. And I've met youth activists working at the international level through the Committee on World Food Security. And Dee is here, she's been active there. And I've seen the youth activists that have been working locally, connecting, finding that space of international solidarity. And there's a negotiation now over a UN policy instrument focused on youth. And already I'm seeing how governments are trying to neutralize it and water it down and make it as useless as possible. And what I'm trying to emphasize to the diplomats is to say the stakes are high. This is it. People are fed up, and the youth are going to come to the negotiating. So it's a space where the youth can't have the power to negotiate with diplomats. And I'm trying to warn the diplomats. They're not going to be diplomatic with you. Their life is at stake. All of your compromising and your wishy-washy language is going to make them angry. And I don't think they heard me. So I'm going to go into those negotiations trying to be militant but calm, right? That way, the stronger the youth activists will be in those negotiations, the stronger I can be, right? The stronger you can be in your position, the stronger I can be, right? So there's those negotiations, there's the COVID report, but I'm trying to see, can I do a country visit? Can I go out there and see what's going on?
The only question I've got for you then is there any countries that are actually showing true leadership in terms of human rights around the idea of a rights-based, right to food?
So there's one example, but it's more from 10 years ago. Brazil, under a different government, did something which is interesting. When you were talking about schools, they connected. They turned school meals into a universal program. All children got fed good food. No stigma, no nothing. You go to school, and what I learned from COVID, what I learned from you and your colleagues and your comrades, and from my own child, is schools aren't just for education. And God knows, I never liked school. It's where we take care of each other. Not just our children, but it's where we take care of each other through our schools. And what, in my community, we were lucky, what the schools did is they kept the kitchens open. And when all our children were at home, they fed the community, no questions asked. They just said, come. If you show up, you get a meal. And I thought, there's an answer, it's just up the street from me, right? What they did in Brazil under a different government is then they connected the local food, the kitchens of the schools to local farmers. So now you're strengthening your farmers and your schools. And they made a choice. They said X percent, 20 or 30% of the farmers have to be indigenous farmers or committed to agroecology. Agroecology meaning a commitment to biodiversity and justice. So it's about those relationships. Connect the schools to the local food producers, to the fishers, where I'm from a very small country in Lebanon. Our farmers aren't going to feed us. We need to import. We have no choice. We have to rely on trade, okay? But all our farmers can feed people in the sense of we can all buy local food in the sense of support the farmers. It's not just about food then, it's about the land, right? then you're feeding your children, you're feeding the families, you're feeding the land, you're feeding the ecosystem. So I always think about relationships and connecting institutions together in that regard.
Yeah, and just to add on that, I was thinking when you were both talking about local and global, we need to start thinking, rooting our products and our initiatives in food locally, but start thinking globally. How can we, you know, what is the work that we're doing on a local level? How can we link it nationally? How can we link it internationally? And I visited a school in Birmingham a few weeks ago, and they make all their food in-house. The young people make it. They've got a chef in-house who makes the food. They grow their own food. They connect the young people to. They have a curriculum that is designed, you know, based around food. Teaching young people how to appreciate food, you know, from when they're little. And it's a primary school. And when I went there, I was just astonished to see so many young people that know so much about food. And you know, who are well fed, who grow their own food. They've got a community garden. Their school is basically a hub of, you know, community and connection, and that's what I really loved about the school. And it felt as part of a big thing in a wider ecosystem of connecting farmers. They teach young people entrepreneurial skills in terms of cooking food, selling food, that sort of thing. And it was just really heartwarming to see that actually there are small examples. Wherever we see in our community, we need to take these good examples and see, okay, what can we take out from it? How can we implement it? And I've never heard of that school in Birmingham. If I'd never, you know, went and visited and went around, spoke to the chef and saw, you know, the staff, I would have never known. The staff and the students eat together, they appreciate food, and it's such a community like atmosphere, and I really liked it, and it just spoke to me from what you were saying.
And to your point, Mimna, the eating together part, right? From the good food bill, what I did pull out is the pleasure. It's pleasure. It's how we define who we are. And it's not, so food doesn't just make us stronger in terms of health and body, it makes us culturally stronger, politically stronger. And, you know, and think about when we have our meals, we have our rules of who do we serve first, right? Our notions of hospitality are different. Each culture has a different notion of hospitality, but that's how we distribute our food, it's how we share our food. It changes the language away from either just economics or just like a narrow understanding of nutrition. Yeah.
I think we should open it up and see whether we've got any. Do we
Now
have
it's
any
3
questions
o'clock.
online?
I've got some questions.
Some questions online. Should we see if there are any in the room first?
Yeah, of course.
Sharon.
It's not often that you spend this amount of time listening to a discussion that doesn't mention once a food. Right? You haven't mentioned the lemon, the melon, the cabbage. You haven't mentioned food, a food. And that is my key point. I'm sitting in a school of law, and I don't think law is the answer. I think education is the answer. I don't think people understand food or know anything about food. They don't know enough to care. It's not until people understand nutrition and it's real that they will begin to care. Yes? You can't impose this. It's got to come from below. So, for example, what percentage of wholemeal flour can you add to a recipe for a pizza before people stop buying it? You don't know, I do. Okay? And no, it isn't niche. It is a key point, because that is proper product development. And there is nowhere near enough good product development going on. Henry Dimbleby has a very good point. There is a lot of stuff out there called food, which actually isn't food. Yes? It should be priced out. It should never have been allowed to be produced in the first place. Foods that are high in fat and also high in sugar should not feature. We should not be able to buy them. They're not food. Food implies something that does you good, and they don't. The whole thing is balmy, isn't it? If we did the sums on the amount of pressure we put on the National Health Service through food-induced illness when we get older, wow, if we took all that money and put it into primary schools.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean, just.
To your point, Sharon, to your point. No, to your point. So this is a challenge. This is. I'll jump in if I may. To your point, Sharon, is the challenge? This is the power of the right to food. You don't have to wait for legislation.
No, I don't think we should.
No, so I'm just echoing what you're saying. So the challenge becomes: what would a right to food university look like?
Yes.
What would the University of Kent look like if it committed as a public institution to the right to food for everyone who works, lives, and studies here?
The right to good food.
To good food, that the University of Kent as a community decides for itself.
Yes.
Because as we saw in the pandemic, hunger is in the student body, it's in the staff, it's in the faculty.
Yes.
What I do in my food law course, I start with, here's the pantry on campus, here's the urban garden on campus, here's how you get food stamps as a student, starting by destigmatizing. I start with recounting when I had to use food stamps when I was in law school. We start taking care of each other before we step out of our own homes.
It's about love, and it's about love in a family. When a mother gives a family a meal, or when a father gives a family a meal, it's about giving love, isn't it? It's not just nutrition. And when you say it's personal, it is absolutely personal. But that's in that area. In nutrition, it isn't personal. Nutrition is appallingly taught. Is it taught at all, really? What is gluten? A lot of people are allergic to it. What is it? I can show it to you. I can actually extract it and show you very clearly what gluten is. Now, when you start to make tiny bits of nutrition real, people want to know more. People don't understand this topic at all. They don't understand it, they don't know. Not only do they not know how to cook food, they don't know, well, I was quiet.
So we've got a few minutes, sort of 12 or 13. Let's we take a few questions, just so that some more voices come in. So if you put your hand up, we'll get somebody to. There's a gentleman sitting next to Professor Taylor Gooby there.
I was just trying to imagine what Kent University's 300 acres would like growing good food.
Delicious.
And I loved your stories. I loved your stories of the Birmingham School, what they were doing. That's just fantastic. I loved your story of what you were doing in your university. And so, and Anna, you asked what good stories there are from around the world, like Kerala in southwest India is a good story of the right to food, or used to be. Or Sweden has the right to food and the right to warmth. So if there's an emergency, Sweden has enough food to last for several months for all its people, okay? So what good stories would illustrate the right to food that you've heard from a town, from a city, from a community, from a county, from a village, you know, maybe in this country and maybe or in another country? Because I think that's one of my strategies for change is what happens in Scotland, like the Land Commission, or land reform, or no smoking in pubs, happens in England later, right? So thanks for that. So the other strategy is good stories. So I can remember your story of your Birmingham school, but what good stories can you tell that really exemplify the success of these policies and charters and commissions you're talking about? What would success look like?
Should we take a couple more?
Yeah, sure. Let's do that. Front there. And students, don't hold back.
Yes, please. I'm not seeing students.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm not a student, but thank you for that. I think really inspirational. So I guess my question is to what someone was saying on that video around the cost of salad and the cost of a burger. I think you were talking about it. So how are we sort of tackling food poverty and the cost, and with the rising food prices now, what can we do? Thanks.
Got any others?
I think this question is more for Professor Fakhri. I do see the value of campaigning for right to food, but I also wonder if it squarely puts the whole issue between us as citizens and the state as the sort of responsible authority. So what about all the big giants involved in the production and distribution of food and the consumption? So what is your sort of plan of action for the next 50 years perhaps?
Oh, okay. In 2 minutes or less. Let me just say to you.
Practices of production, distribution, and consumption, and I'm deeply troubled by the issue of corruption across different countries in the globe. So just wanted to hear your thoughts on it.
Okay, should we let you reply to those?
I'll take the first question.
Go ahead.
On your point, good practice. I want to say it's about education, like what we said before, but in a sense that we need to review the school day. But we're not, the priorities aren't there. You know, I actually remember being in, I want to say maybe second or third year at school, which is in Scotland, my maths is away, 14, I want to say. And they reformed the school day, how long it was, and cut lunchtime from an hour to 45 minutes. And actually at the same time, there was probably more people with the rising poverty rates that were on free school meals, or were entitled to free school meals. And the other point that you said earlier, that the people aren't taking free school meals up, again it goes back to stigma. You don't cut the opportunity to eat out of school day. You know, like keep it. At the time it was an hour, they cut it to 45 minutes. We all said that we probably, because of how quick that sometimes you needed to eat, you actually probably needed, like the Italians, you know, you needed 2 or 3 years to eat. You know, but and it's about the culture, it goes back to earlier. You know, I think in local authorities in Scotland, and there is a few good practices off the top of my head, I want to say North Ayrshire are pretty good at it. You know, they know that, you know, they're pretty good at collecting the data. They know who needs it most. I want to say my own local authority, and I'm Glaswegian to be fair, but I live in Coatbridge, in North Lanarkshire. You know, that we go back to the holiday hunger provisions. You know, every, you know, whether it's a long weekend, a weeks off in October or Christmas, 2 weeks off of Christmas, or dare I say it, the 6 weeks or 7 weeks in summer, the holiday provision is there, and it's incorporated into the right to play, the right to be heard, the right to eat, and the right to food, you know, around the whole idea of it's a lifelong impact, you know, and they realise that there are far too many children living in poverty that are food insecure, that actually whenever a plate of food is put down to them, they don't know what to do with it, they don't know where the food came from, what it means, because they've been deprived of it so long. So then when a policy is put in place, and there is, you know, that provision of food in front of them, they just want to run away, or they sit at it and they go, what do I do with that? Or the food's going to the wrong people.
The Scottish education system used to appreciate the value of food a lot more. When my mother was in Dumfriesshire in school, they used to have 2 weeks off at half term in October. 1 week to play and 1 week to pick potatoes. Fatty picking week, yeah. Do they do that anymore in Scotland? No.
Or if they do, then there's siloed, that's a good practice, and that's a problem, because it's not across the whole of Scotland. And we're supposed to say that we're leading the way, and actually probably in some areas we are, but I don't think it's probably fair always to use the broad term of we are leading the way. In some places we are. It's far too vague to say that we're leading the way when we're not actually delivering anywhere near as much as we need to on the ground. It's frustrating, it is, and I really want more good practice, like what was there in your question, but unfortunately there isn't. But we're all good at, you know, reviewing the quality of food, you know, the food checks that are there, you know, almost yearly. I think we've been doing that in Scotland since 2005, I want to say. And dare I say it, actually the standards have got better. I'm going to be biased in that, they probably are. but we're just not doing enough.
Does anyone want to pick up on any of the other?
Yeah, just on the point of education, I don't think we're taught anything about food in schools ever. And you had an hour full of.
It was an hour, and it got it down to 45 minutes.
45 minutes.
And it was an increase in the amount of people, or the amount of students that were in the school, and a rise in poverty rates. You can't accommodate, I think at the time it was 1,400 kids. Whether they were going out for dinner or lunch, or they were staying in, you can't accommodate 45 minutes for 1,400 people to eat. And the staff, I think there was 250 staff, you know. Maybe the staff shied ways more often and chatted ways more often, like what you were saying, eating together. Huge.
Yeah. In 1974, I was a food activist. I ran down Oxford Street shouting Margaret Thatcher, milk snatcher. We used to give children free milk.
Yeah, so in secondary, I had 25 minutes for lunch, which was, it's ridiculous. How do you expect a young, and that's 25 minutes to eat your food, to speak to your friends, to socialise, to do all that, and you know, eat good food in school. And I think it's ridiculous. I think we need to combine the education of teaching young people how to appreciate food from an early age. Like when I went to that school, and the chef was telling me, he said, when I started with the young kids, they didn't know the difference between like vegetables like carrot, okra, aubergine. They didn't know anything. They didn't know, you know, how they look like, the colours, anything. They didn't know anything. But when you start teaching young people, when they start to learn how to appreciate food, and they're cooking it and they're making it with their friends, they're growing it, they're planting seeds, they're, you know, helping out in community gardens, that sort of thing. It fosters that culture of connection and that community. That's what I really like. But we need to combine that with strong legislation, with strong policy strategies and agreements with young people, with government, with big business, like we were talking about, and actually get them to look at the quality of food that they're selling in supermarkets, removing you know, a lot of, you know, the high fat and sugar and salt food off our shelves, because they're not healthy and we shouldn't be selling it in the first place, like we were talking about. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add on that.
So to answer the question directly but briefly, it's corporate power. And the problem with corporate power is corporations, by design, concentrate power in the hands of the few and are not held liable. You hold the corporation liable, but those are real humans who are making a profit off of our bad health and off of our youth and off of all of this. So there's a push to limit corporate power, but I don't hear the question enough is, why do we have corporations in our food systems in the first place? That's a relatively recent phenomenon, last 60 years. We can feed each other and take care of each other without corporations, through other forms. Legal forms, trusts, cooperatives, schools, universities, what have you. We have them there. So that's the common foe, is corporate power. And to foreshadow tomorrow, a legal agenda of how to fight corporations. Sounds good.
So, thanks all for turning up. This conversation can continue. We have the CeCIL annual lecture tomorrow, which Michael's just mentioned, in the Gulbenkian Theatre. If you haven't booked to come to it, please do. And I'm sure you'll be around, won't you, milling around before and after as well. So
not after. I'll be done. I'll be physically done.
Well, hopefully we'll see you again. Thanks for coming along, everybody. Please join me. Thank you.